Join Charles Price as he takes Living Truth on location to Africa. In these special editions, visit South Africa, Mozambique, and Malawi to see what the churches are doing in response to the AIDS pandemic. Stories of pain and suffering. Stories of hope and inspiration.
C'est comment, c'est comment, c'est comment.
Join us on a journey to Africa.
Welcome to Mozambique. We're on location in Africa, and this is the second of 3 special broadcasts of Living Truth. Today you're going to meet some children whose stories will inspire you and touch your hearts. They're children whose lives have been impacted, sometimes devastated, by the African AIDS pandemic. There's Samuel. He's an orphan at 13 years of age, and he takes care of his younger sister.
Meu coração tocou dor e sentimento junto por ver as crianças sozinhas.
Luisa is just 7 years old. Her mother died and her father is injured.
Ini ndachimwana kana ndinakora chineri nokuti ane timanga ndaona ninga ni mulungu wanga po ndisangirange dabale nawande kinene kundisiyisangire sofrere ndabishimwana.
And Emily must leave home at 5 a.m. every morning in order to collect firewood that they can sell on the market in order to support her 7 siblings. You'll hear her story. Mozambique is a country of great beauty and wonderfully friendly people, but it also has challenges. Mozambique ranks at the bottom of almost all the United Nations world rankings. If you lived here, your life expectancy would be a mere 38 years. That's only half of what a Canadian or North American would expect to live. Mozambique is just now finding its way after a brutal 17-year civil war. Although peace finally came back in 1993, the country is still recovering. And like much of Africa, HIV and AIDS continues to wreak havoc on the population. And that's why we're here. This week's broadcast of Living Truth is different to our normal biblical teaching from the People's Church. For 3 weeks, we are in Africa, and we're seeking to raise funds in order to build life centers. This is part of our missions outreach in which we want to impact our world. Last week, we were in South Africa, and we brought you stories of need and inspiration. We asked you to invest financially in our partner organization there, Hands at Work in Africa. Your response has been wonderful, and we've received support from all across Canada. I want to thank you so very much for your generosity and participation in this project. Here's a recap of last week's show that inspired so many viewers across Canada.
On last week's program, we traveled to Velverdind, a 3-hour drive north of Johannesburg in South Africa. This is an economically deprived area following years of neglect during apartheid. Here we met 2 young girls, Constance and Ellery. The AIDS pandemic has devastated their lives. Both parents are dead. They've come to this area with their grandmother to seek refuge with relatives. In the same village, we found Felsh, a 17-year-old orphan struggling on his own to take care of his 2 younger brothers. Then we learned about life centers, run by the South African organization Hands at Work in Africa. A life center acts as a hub for all kinds of day programs and activities to help people affected by AIDS.
I take these children like my grandchild. I take this place like my home. I take the teachers like my daughters. That's why every day I'm so happy.
At the Life Center, we met Gradual. He is HIV positive, and like most children here, an orphan. After school, he gets help with homework, a hot meal, and companionship. Then he goes home where he's cared for by his two closest relatives, 17-year-old twin girls.
Gradual was very shy to people. He wasn't even able to do well at school because he wasn't able to communicate with other children. So when we take him to the center, have a good meal, he changed even physically and even to become friendly with other children and not to be shy with people.
And we saw how 18-year-old Bethel manages to keep himself and his two younger brothers in school. He receives food parcels from Hands at Work, as well as clothing, school supplies, and assistance with housing.
Here, this is where we put our meals.
And how long does one bag of meal last?
It lasts for 25 days.
Well, you have it very, very tightly organized.
Thanks.
My 17-year-old son isn't as tidy as you are.
Hands at Work wants to build more life centers. The need is great. South Africa was the first stop on this journey, and in the next 2 weeks, there are many more touching stories to hear, many more faces to meet.
Today, we're here in Mozambique because we'd like to take you on another journey. A journey that will challenge you to walk alongside some of our African brothers and sisters in Christ. Living Truth is proud to be partnering with Hands at Work in Africa. Through them, we see the remarkable work that God is able to do. The calling of Hands at Work is to serve the most vulnerable people, the dying, the widows, and orphans. My friend and colleague, George Sneeman, is the founder. He started in South Africa, and now Hands at Work is in 7 African countries.
You are watching a special edition of Living Truth, on location in Africa.
With so much need in South Africa, why expand to countries like Mozambique?
It's a pandemic. We've got 180,000 new orphans every month in sub-Saharan Africa. This is not a time to be conservative. This is not a time to work according to your capacity, but this is a time to keep doors open. When you look at Mozambique, for example, Mozambique have gone through a civil war. Mozambique faced huge challenges, and on top of that, the AIDS pandemic came into that country, and Mozambique and the church in Mozambique are desperate for help in the circumstances.
Who is leading the work in Mozambique?
We've got a wonderful man called Carlos who's leading the work in Mozambique. I met Carlos about 6 years ago. I walked through Mozambique and I met Carlos at the mission station, and I just saw the most incredible potential in this man. He had a fantastic heart for people. He was solid in the Word of God, and he had a compassion that you don't see many times. I invited Carlos to come back and join us here at Africa School of Missions, where Carlos came the year after that. He studied theology, he did nursing, and he spent 3 years after that working with me in South Africa in the communities before he decided to go back to Mozambique and to duplicate the work there.
And since I met George, things were different. At the beginning, I didn't know anything. And I started to read the Bible and share the word and pray, and then that my joy comes up. In each day, if you don't do anything to people, or do something to the orphans, or do something to the patients, or to the widow, if I don't do none of those, I feel not good that day, not completed.
Then there are the vast number of orphans who have lost their parents to AIDS. There's simply too many of them to put them all into orphanages. So Hands at Work volunteers connect them with a local caregiver, a granny or auntie, who look out for them, and that keeps them all in the same community that they're used to. The next stage is to build a life center like this one to support these families. They're like a home away from home, where children can come for a hot meal, after-school care, training in how to grow their own food, and to just find a caring adult who will be their protector an advocate and provider, to give them a hug and to make their world just a little less frightening. Lives are transformed through this place of safety, and centers like this one have been praised as a best practice model by USAID and UNICEF.
The magnitude of orphans due to HIV/AIDS is so large that an institutional response, besides not being in the best interest of the child, will never be the answer. Orphanages for more than 14 million orphans simply cannot be built and sustained.
I want to introduce you to Samuel and Rosaria, who are poor and fatherless. And they've been under the care of Hands at Work. Theirs is a story of hope for the future.
Samuel is 13. He and his 9-year-old sister Rosaria live in the northeastern part of Mozambique. They live alone. Like so many children in this region, they are orphans. Their father was the first to die in 2002.
The situation was very terrible. Number one, because the dad had just passed away, and then the mother became sick, became ill also. It was for them so difficult.
Hands at Work found the children living in a rough hut. The mother was too sick to care for them. They had dropped out of school to look after her.
The mother was crying, the mother not eating, nothing like that. Both of them, I don't know who told them, they said drop in school, said no hope. They gave up from school. They were out from school.
That's when Hands at Work stepped in. Volunteers built a sturdy house for them to live in, one with a lock on the door. They protected the children from exploitation, from relatives who wanted to steal their land. When their mother died, Hands at Work arranged a funeral.
Meu coração tocou dor, sentimento, junto por ver as crianças sozinhas.
Volunteers like Carlos are from local churches. They're transforming lives, family by family, child by child. It took a lot of time and paperwork, but Hands at Work got Samuel and Rosaria back into school.
Português, matemática, não pode contar matemática.
Português, matemática.
Samuel is catching up on the classes he missed. He's in the 3rd grade now and has big dreams.
He said that he would like to become a teacher, but teaching Portuguese language. And then I asked him that you need to be very strong, because you know it's not easy to become a teacher of Portuguese.
Volunteers also help orphans with chores like laundry. Outside their home, children can visit the local life center for support. It provides meals, fun, and a sense of community. Rosaria and Samuel have faced tremendous obstacles, the loss of both parents, poverty, and homelessness. Today, because of Hands at Work, they have a home, a stable food supply, and a new faith in the future.
Eu vi que as crianças já estão a viver livre, muito feliz. Já conseguem brincar livre com os outros.
Hands at Work wants to build another life center here in Mozambique. Founder George Sneyman has the faith to believe that it is possible with our help. He started Hands at Work by obeying God's call to care for the poor. The work has now expanded to 7 different countries in Africa. But it all started with one person, knowing deep in his heart that this was his calling. And he heard loud and clear, that his mission was to mobilize the church in response to the HIV/AIDS crisis on this continent. Now, you might not be able to do anything big like that. God may not be calling you to do anything that seems big, but there is a way you can participate. There is a way you can help the dying, the widows, the orphans, just as Jesus Christ commanded us to do so. You can contribute financially to this work. Hands at Work already has the structure, the people, the training. They already have some life centers, and they want to reproduce this model in areas where there is the greatest need. Hands at Work specifically wants to build another life center here in Mozambique. And I invite you, as viewers of Living Truth, to take up this challenge as we support Hands at Work in Africa.
Today, we are asking for you to partner with us by giving a financial and prayer commitment. With your help, Hands at Work in Africa can act on the biblical mandate to help orphans and widows. They can build life centers to give a place of safety and hope to the most vulnerable. The fastest way to help is to call now at 1-888-269-6085 to make a secure donation with your credit card, or donate online at www.livingtruth.ca. For those living in Canada and the United States, please send a check to Living Truth, P.O. Box 6100, Station B, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, M2K2Z5. Your contributions will impact countless orphans and widows in need. Life Centers in Africa. Living Truth invites you to participate in God's transforming work.
Clearly, there's still a lot of work to do. Hands at Work want to expand in Namatonda. George, can I ask you why that area in particular?
Carlos identified Namatonda as a burning point, as we would call it. Namatonda is on the Beira corridor. It is a place where all the heavy traffic, the big trucks would move on the whole time, and the girls in Namatonda in particular are very vulnerable. And so Carlos identified that as the area where he would like to empower the church to build the resilience of the children there.
And what is a life center going to do there?
A life center will bring life. A life center will be a hub where all the activities that the church would be involved in Namatonda would work from. The life center would be the very base that would provide the community a tool to work in the community.
So as well as addressing people who have already got HIV/AIDS and all the fallout consequences of that, it's also going to have a preventative role. You say that with the trucks coming through and so on, the girls are vulnerable. How is that going to work?
Absolutely. I think a very clear example that we could use to illustrate what you are saying there is if we could be providing food security and the most vulnerable children, in particular the African girl, if we could provide them with a meal a day, we could prevent them from getting involved with the truck drivers and putting their lives on the line to secure a meal a day.
Because it's their economic needs that drive this very often.
Absolutely, and that's why poverty and AIDS so closely connected. That AIDS is a result of a desperate poor person.
So what effect will a life center have on that area and on that community?
Well, we hope and trust that that life center would be a beacon of life and hope for anybody infected and affected by AIDS and poverty in that community. It will provide a place where people from birth until 80, the grandmothers caring for these children, all of them will have a place where they will feel safe and a place where we could provide, as a church, support and hope and help.
There's a widespread belief in southern Africa that a man could be cured of AIDS by having sex with a virgin. That thought is never far from 14-year-old Emilia's mind. Every morning, she sets out by herself to collect firewood to sell at the market. She walks 3 hours away from her home and 3 hours back. In this region of Mozambique, it's a woman's job to collect wood for cooking. With her mother sick, Emilia has no choice. She's the only one who can go. It is a great risk for little money. Her brother brings the firewood to a nearby town. He makes the equivalent of 2 cents for each bundle he sells. It wasn't always like this. The family used to own 2 plots of land called mashambas. They would grow food for their own use and to sell at the local market. But when the father became ill, they sold both mashambas to pay for his medical bills. When he died of AIDS last year, everything changed.
Eu fui estudar, porque quando meu pai foi para a cidade, depois ninguém que tinha pessoa para ajudar a comprar cadernos. Quando fomos sempre na escola, exigia cadernos, uniforme. Nesse tempo, meu pai que fazia despesa. Depois, quando aprendeu a vida, já com família, as crianças assim, para a maneira de comer, não tinha nada. Agora eu fazia buscado para conseguir a criança comer. Nós adultos podemos dormir com fome, agora crianças não vão aguentar.
Raimundo and his sister take any job they can find. One of those jobs is pounding grain, the first step to making porridge. Emilia does this for neighbors in return for food. It's exhausting work.
Yeah. This is Emilia's mother.
Yeah, that's
Okay. This is Armando.
Hands at Work would like to help with a new life center in Namatonda.
Okay. This is Emilia.
Emilia, I heard about you so much.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for letting us come to your home.
This family needs a stable food supply. They do not have enough to eat. The youngest child is showing signs of severe malnutrition and scabies. Most of the children suffer from worms.
Where do people who don't have food get food? The answer is they go out into the fields and amongst other things they look for mice. And Raimundo here is a good mouse catcher. He's got a whole bowl full he's just brought back from the field where he's been out looking for mice, and they bring them home and puts them in this sort of spit here and cooks them whole exactly as they're found, their coats and everything.
Mice are a staple of their diet. The family doesn't have any other source of protein, no fish or meat. Today is better than most. Neighbors donated some greens. Emilia hopes for more days like this. She knows her situation could get worse. If her mother dies of AIDS like her father, her brothers will rely on her more than ever. If she doesn't look after these children, who will?
The situation with Emilia and her family can be described as nothing less than desperate. What kind of help would a life center provide for this family and others like them?
Now, we just saw now the life that Emilia and her family are facing this year, and they face some very serious challenges. Her mother is critically ill, and we need to keep her mother alive and keep her doing well, and we need to do that through home-based care. And all these activities to look after her mother would take place from the Life Center. Life Center would be the place where we would move out to reach her mother and to look after her medically. But of course, Amelia also faced some very serious challenge on food security. We need to look after Amelia. We need to make her less vulnerable. And one of the best ways that we could do that is to immediately provide her with food, a meal to her and her siblings every day at the Life Center. By doing that, Amelia would be just much less vulnerable than she's at this stage. Of course, they got rid of their property. They had to try and keep their father alive. So they also lost the only means that they as a family had to bring in any finances, and we need to help them in that area also.
We saw that her brother had gone out and got some mice, which is quite a common thing to cook and eat, the only source of real protein for them. And it is a desperate situation. Supposing the mother did pass away, which is a likely possibility, I understand, what happens to the remaining children?
It will become, as we would say, Charles, a child-headed household. It would be a family that would be headed up by children under the age of 18, and that would make them very vulnerable.
Once there's food in their stomachs, George, what's next?
Yes, that's just the first step, and that's something that needs to happen immediately. Of course, if we look at Amelia, she's been out of school already for 1 year. And so it's critical that we get Amelia back into the educational system as quick as we could. Not just getting her back into school, but bring her into the Life Center and all the activities that we could provide to her here. For example, after school care center, where we could provide services to help her to make sure that she's coping academically, and to help her with life skills that would help her to be less vulnerable in a community where she lives.
They're a family of 7, ranging from a toddler up to mid-teens. How do you address the whole spectrum in a family like that once the mother has passed on?
When we look at the youngest child, who face some health issues right now, that child would be serviced in a Life Center, the preschool as we would call it, and the nurses would come in and provide that service to look after the child and to prepare the child for going to school. We also looked at Amelia's oldest brother, who lost a piece of land where he could be economically active and provide food, and we would bring him into our life skills program after school and in the afternoons, and we would teach him new life skills, for example, brick making and agriculture, and how to cope and to provide for the family in the future.
George, this is one family. There are many other families in similar need. What is the cost of a Life Center here in Mozambique?
The first thing I would like to say that this would be a massive partnership with the community. We would involve all different spheres of people in the community to take part in building this Life Center. We would call on volunteers to help us, and this would be a partnership with the local community. We are looking at supporting this community to build the Life Center with 50,000 Canadian dollars, which will build the Life Center, equip it, and provide them with operational cost for the first year.
And this is spearheaded by the churches in the community, with other members of the community joining in.
Yes, sir.
And $50,000 is an astronomical amount of money here in Mozambique. It doesn't seem that great to those of us in Canada. But this is where you and I come in. We want to help Hands at Work in Africa to build several life centers, because the need is so great, and this is one very strategic and actually cost-efficient way, because it involves the whole community. It is led by volunteers, and it transforms and makes possible hope for literally hundreds of people, dozens and dozens and dozens of families. And you can't come and do this yourself. Most of us will never come to Mozambique, never come to South Africa, never come to Malawi. We'll just empathize from a distance, but we can participate financially, and I challenge you to do so.
Today, we are asking for you to partner with us by giving a financial and prayer commitment. With your help, Hands at Work in Africa can act on the biblical mandate to help orphans and widows. They can build life centers to give a place of safety and hope to the most vulnerable. The fastest way to help is to call now at 1-888-269-6085 to make a secure donation with your credit card, or donate online at www.livingtruth.ca. For those living in Canada and the United States, please send a check to Living Truth, P.O. Box 6100, Station B, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, M2K2Z5. Your contributions will impact countless orphans and widows in need. Life Centers in Africa. Living Truth invites you to participate in God's transforming work. You are watching a special edition of Living Truth on location in Africa.
When George Sneyman founded Hands at Work, he sought volunteer workers from the one group he felt could have the greatest impact on the AIDS epidemic, the African church. The church is a highly respected institution in Africa, both by the general population as well as by the governments of most countries. It has far-reaching influence. It has a large network. Every village, pretty well, in Africa has a church. And the church has a biblical mandate to care for the poor, the widows, and the orphans. Here in Mozambique, the first church to send volunteers to work with Hands at Work was the Assembly of God International Church. It turned the church upside down. Or more correctly, perhaps I should say, it turned the church the right side up.
This church is at the heart of an incredible story, a story of change and spiritual renewal. It's here that Hands at Work first found volunteers in Mozambique, people willing to help care for those victimized by AIDS.
Zilo zachinja, kuchinja kwazo na kuti pakutanga taifunga kuti ndinhenda ya kuroiwa o ndinhenda ya kutora kubaze munhu zino rubatano koma akatidzidzisa kuti nhenda iyi agave sida ndinhenda yakapinda mune munhu yoenda mune umwe asina.
This is a great sickness that has come to our world.
For many years, church members did not understand the causes of AIDS. Victims were stigmatized.
É verdade que já mudou, porque desde o princípio as pessoas estavam muito mal. Sempre andavam aí doentes e morriam de qualquer maneira, porque ninguém cuidava. Quando nós começamos então a dar os cuidados domiciliários, nos princípios estava nos rir.
But 5 years ago, Carlos Guia asked this church to partner with him, to join forces with Hands at Work. He called on members to follow the commands in the Bible.
The people, long time ago, they were not interested to serve as now they're doing because of this module. And they're praying for each other, praying for the sick people, and also care for them.
Volunteers visit the homes of the sick. They offer support and pray with those suffering from AIDS. They also help with practical chores, everything from sweeping to washing to chopping wood. Church members have infused new energy into the local life center. They build bricks used to make homes for the poor. They work in the community garden and in the chicken coop.
Tell me, Carlos, about these chickens.
Yes, these chickens, one part is we give it to the orphans as a meal, and another part we sell them to buy meal supplement for the children.
The orphans have benefited enormously from church volunteers at the Life Center. They used to be overlooked. Now they're given regular meals and go to school.
The orphans started singing a song, and dancing. They were like a cripple. Children could not move, could not talk to others. But they know now about God. People, they're serving God.
We are more than just a body. We're made up of body, soul, and spirit.
By helping those most in need, this church has experienced an extraordinary change.
Claro, é que as igrejas são eles próprios que têm aquele coração de caridade para poder ajudar as pessoas.
A fé que eu tenho é de ajudar os doentes, porque há doentes que não têm familiares, que é preciso gente ajudar a levar para o hospital e lavar as suas feridas e ver também se ele participa no tratamento, toma comprimido tal ou não.
Here in Mozambique, the tragedy of the AIDS has served as a catalyst for a spiritual revival.
Unaona kuti Mwari wada kutenta basa lake lifambe pachena nikuda kwenenda ndinenda kaona kuti Mwari ari kutungamirira kuti zilo zifambe zvakanaka nepamusoro pemweya mutsveni nepamusoro peshoko raMwari tamberi onewo nzvimbo.
The Assembly of God International Church was the first to join Hands at Work in Mozambique. By reaching beyond their walls, it has seen an explosion of faith within. A healing spirit members hope will extend across Africa.
If you just joined us, we're in Gondola, Mozambique, here in southern Africa. And today's program is focusing on a Christian response to fighting AIDS and its consequences. We at Living Truth are very fortunate to have a strong Christian partner in Hands at Work, a partner that is founded on the biblical mandate to care for orphans, widows, and the dying. Hands at Work is a remarkable organization that is working with the local churches to find community-based solutions to this crisis. AIDS is a very complex problem, but the Bible makes it clear that we can and we must do something to help our brothers and sisters in this desperate need. In this community, God is using ordinary people to do extraordinary things. And Isabel's story is a good example.
Isabel is 12 years old, and her younger sister Lena is 10. They're neighborhood champions at this African version of tag. What's more important than winning the game is the fact that they have the energy and spirit to play and laugh. This is the house where Hands at Work found the girls nearly 2 years ago. There was no laughter then, only tears.
Their mother was sick, ill. And we see that the kids were still little, and we couldn't figure out who, once they passed away, who would look after the children.
The sisters look back at that time and wonder how they managed to care for their mother.
When mother was sick, it was disturbing for their minds. They couldn't, stand well at the moment when the mother passed away. They're very weeping, all the time weeping. The children have to cook, the children have to sweep in the ground, the children have to force when the mothers pass tools on the bed. They have to hold all that, the smelling thing like that, and it was hard, really hard for them.
Hands at Work searched the town for a widow or granny with a compassionate heart, someone to care for the children after their mother's death. They found Fatima. Fatima was a distant relative, an aunt. She was willing to take the children into her home, but didn't have the resources to take care of them. She already had a grandchild to care for, so Hands at Work provided all that they needed.
Eu pensei em levar elas para elas e manter lá sozinha, já que a idade é muito menor, nada elas podiam conseguir fazer. Então eu senti prefiro elas estarem comigo e eu ir fazer descarto, trazer para elas poderem comer. Porque a idade que elas têm não conseguem nem ir trabalhar para alguém, não aguenta.
It's a good arrangement. Fatima has lost all her family to AIDS. The girls are a welcome addition to her household, and they're not a financial burden.
Eles levam essas crianças para lá na associação, dão de comer, dão caderno, lapiseiras, sabão.
Fatima has a mashamba, a garden plot. She grows vegetables and this grain. There's some for the home and some to sell. But it's so far away that Fatima must stay overnight when she goes there to tend the garden. Now she has a solution. Isabel and Lena take care of the grandchild while Fatima is away at the mashamba.
Para a criança, elas ficam com essa criança, dão banho, dão de comer, já que uma estuda de manhã, outra estuda à tarde. Quando a outra larga, deixa também a criança com a outra vai à escola.
After school, the girls go to the Life Center for a daily meal. And once a month, there's the Orphan Fun Day. Here they can play with other children like themselves.
The future, we see it now, it is in good hands. We feel comfortable because at school, when you follow up at the school, we see that good results from there. The teachers, and long time, they're still very shy. Now, they're very open, they're very free, and they talk their problems to others. And then they're gaining a lot at school. They're getting good marks.
And there's one more thing. Hands at Work negotiated with the local tribal authority to preserve the land where their old house stands.
We kept the land for them. Once they grow up and they're schooling, whatever, they will have their land protected.
Food for today, hope for tomorrow. Thanks to Hands at Work in Africa.
With good news stories like Isabel's and Lena's, it might be easy to say things are under control. My help is no longer needed. But that would be to forget that the number of HIV/AIDS infected people is growing vastly all across Africa. Here in Namatonda, Carlos and his team have identified some great needs. Here they found Chico and his 2 young children.
The Namatonda region of Mozambique is very poor. Hands at Work has forged a strong partnership with churches here. Pastor Simon is one of the local volunteers. He and fellow volunteer Carlos are accompanying Charles today.
Well, Carlos and Pastor Simon, here we are in this part of the village of Namatonda. Yeah. And we are going to visit a home that you identified as being one that's in particular need here.
Yeah.
Pastor Simon has located a man named Chico and his 2 children. They live in a remote area. The road only goes so far. The rest of the way is a long walk down a winding path.
Be careful going down the beach.
Yes, it's quite steep.
Yeah.
When it rains, I'm sure it's very slippery.
Yeah.
Getting to the family isn't easy, but Chico is lucky to have this land. It was given to him by local community leaders.
And that's what Chico.
Ascati, Chico. We have heard about you, so we're very glad to come and meet you.
Chico's wife died in 2003 of AIDS. He chose to look after his son Joas and daughter Luisa by himself. This is rare in a culture where men don't often take sole responsibility for their children.
Ndaona ningani mulungu wanga bwe ndisangiranga dabale wande kinene kundisi sangiri sofreri ndabachi mwana iburusi ndapata ntima mikonisatan kulera nanga tinalere ndinawo.
It's hard being a single father. He's embarrassed to do the family laundry with the women of the village. Instead, Chico goes off to a quiet area where no one will see. Last spring, his situation went from bad to desperate. Chico was in an accident at work. He lost the use of his shoulder. Since then, he and his children have struggled to survive.
Muito mais. Ndiri bom, ndikakonesa campo carilha bom para na piana. Às vezes campunga ou mesmo peixe. Mas ndicava buscar tomba dinheiro. Sentindo como kama buscar dinheiro. Então, eu sempre ficava parado. Ficava no base, capichita. Agora, como ele teve acidente na bacena, parava base nada. Essa animação de rascar de qualquer forma. anachibushikatia chingu ching'onong'ono cha leve nsinakapata ndatinyesana pyana.
The children help by hunting for food and collecting water. Chico does odd jobs for the neighbors. For many months, this tree was their only shelter.
That tree was his house there.
With the children, they slept under the tree.
Exactly.
It's not even a big tree.
Nothing, yeah.
So where do they keep their food?
They would keep it just under the blanket. That's it.
And that was the condition when Pastor Simon found him.
Exactly. That was the condition.
Pastor Simon worked with members of his church to build Chico this new house. It's basic, but the home provides shelter and a place to put their belongings. Once a life center is opened in this region, Chico and his children will receive more help.
When the center is established, what will this family receive from the life center?
Once the multiple center built, they will be having like one meal, very rich meal, like a nutritional soft porridge once a day. On top of that, they have a packet to eat at night. Something like that will be happening, and it will help a lot for them.
Hands at Work will also try to get the children back into school and find a doctor to look at Chico's shoulder. With a life center, this family will be able to go from surviving day to day to building a better future.
Louisa and Giles are living in an area that is desperately poor. They and many children like them need volunteer workers to help them out, to provide shelter, adequate food, and means of income for the father and access to education. They need an advocate, a protector. That's where Hands at Work is so good. They come alongside these vulnerable children and give them hope for the future. Last week, we told you about plans to build 4 more life centers in South Africa. This week, we're in Mozambique, and we've learned about the need for a life center here. These centers cost about $50,000 each. That's a lot of money, you might think. How is my little bit going to help? Well, when you have a little bit, and it's added to by another little bit, and you keep adding and multiplying, then before you know it, a large amount has been gathered, large enough, we trust, to together build these life centers. I hope you'll consider investing in the lives of these needy children as God enables you.
Today, we are asking for you to partner with us by giving a financial and prayer commitment. With your help, Hands at Work in Africa can act on the biblical mandate to help orphans and widows. They can build life centers to give a place of safety and hope to the most vulnerable. The fastest way to help is to call now at 1-888-269-6085 to make a secure donation with your credit card, or donate online at www.livingtruth.ca. For those living in Canada and the United States, please send a check to Living Truth, P.O. Box 6100, Station B, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, M2K2Z5. Your contributions will impact countless orphans and widows in need. Life Centers in Africa. Living Truth invites you to participate in God's transforming work.
George, in addition to the wonderful work you're doing here in Africa, your mission includes a sense of being called to be a prophetic voice to the church worldwide. What do you mean by that?
In a very humble way, we would like to speak to the church outside Africa and to take them back to the Word of God and to deeply challenge them. The church outside Africa at the moment is the wealthiest, healthiest, best equipped church in the history of mankind. And we want to challenge them and stir them up and say to them that they can make a difference and they can display the unity of the body now by getting involved in a part of the body that is suffering tremendously.
And so, George, what lessons can the church in North America and the Western world at large learn from the vibrant church in Africa?
I think the church in Africa have got so much to offer the church and Christians outside Africa. For sure, certainly the first thing would be faith, just that raw faith and the dependence that they have in God in mundane things like, today I need to eat, I need to do something, we need to rely on God. And people coming from outside Africa are struck by the faith that the people in Africa have to have on a daily basis. I think secondly is Ubuntu, what we would call Ubuntu. And that is just that deep passion and love that people have for one another. In fact, in Africa, in our languages, the word orphan does not exist, because it's just automatic that if something happened to me, that my brother or my neighbor or my uncle would care for my children. And that is an aspect in the church in Africa that could bring huge blessings to the church that is so independent outside Africa.
So what you're saying is that, on the one hand, the church in the Western world has lots of resources and equipment and material things. The church in Africa, bereft of much of that, has a spiritual substance and vitality. And so your concern is not just to bring the material assistance of the Western church to Africa, but the spiritual life of the African church back to the Western world. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And I believe that the church in Africa are desperately poor materially. And we need the help of the church outside Africa, otherwise we will not survive. But the church outside Africa need the support of the church in Africa to enrich them spiritually. And I believe this is God's perfect plan in this time. That's why I'm so confident, and that's why we're really so convinced that this is a time where God wants to bring the body together, and the blessings will flow both ways.
And I know you've had volunteers who come and they move into the villages sometimes, into the communities, and live within the homes of the local people. A friend of mine who was on the Footprints program came and lived in a child-headed household. And that's what we might call being incarnational, isn't it? Becoming one with the people that we've come to serve.
That breaks down every wall of separation, and that brings Christ. When people do that, the communities that receive them open up to them, because they understand that these people moved from one place into their community, and they are prepared to live like them. That's the power of Charles.
So how is Lydia doing today?
Laura Eliasson is a Canadian nurse. She's volunteering for a full year with Hands at Work.
The core values and goals of Hands at Work motivated me to work with them. I really appreciate how they care about serving people and just putting yourself lower and reaching out to orphans and widows and those in desperate need.
Training took 6 weeks at headquarters in South Africa. Then she was posted to Mozambique to work with Rubatano home-based care.
She needs to be tested, though, because if she's been sick and coughing for so long, it's probably tuberculosis. This experience has changed me because I get to see a group of people caring for their neighbors. The people here just work so hard, both the patients and the volunteers, and it's just really touched me to see what these people will do for their neighbors. I think this experience has just made me see how much God values everyone. He values the sick and the orphaned and the dying and the widows, and just that he wants us as his people and his children to take care of each other. Help them see you and know you. And thank you for it, Jesus. In your name, Jesus.
The interesting thing, George, is that the material poverty of the church in Africa could well be one of the contributing factors to its spiritual vitality, because they have no choice but to depend on God and so do so. Whereas in the West, our material prosperity could well be the corrupting influence that causes us to rely on things other than God and we become very carnal in our spiritual life.
Absolutely. And I believe this is a challenge for the church coming to Africa. And we in Hands at Work give them a very clear mandate. If you come to Africa, you come according to Philippians 2. Like Jesus came to the world as a servant. He came as a servant, and that is where there is a power in the gospel. And we do not want the church to come to Africa with the power of the finances and the power of bringing and being the new masters again. What Africa needs is a church outside Africa to come and display Jesus to us as servants. Even though they've got the capacity, they've got the education and resources to be in control. We ask them to be Christ-like and to come in spite of that, and to come in to serve us. And that would display the absolute power and character of Christ.
Thank you for joining me today in Mozambique in Africa. Next week, we're going to Malawi to see another facet of HIV/AIDS on this continent and how the Christian church is responding to it. And I hope you'll join me. But before I go, I just want to remind you about the phone number and the address to send your donations. Your generosity is greatly, greatly appreciated. God bless you, and thank you.
The preceding program was brought to you by Living Truth from the People's Church, Toronto, Canada.